Right, today I'm going to give you a very shallow journey through the last 2 years for me. I'm going to try and mention as much as I can about how we approached open source, open hardware, education, and things like that really. But really it's going to be a little bit of the story of Pepperoni and Raspberry Pi as I saw it. There'll be a lot of memes, a lot of quotes, a lot of cliches because they're pretty bandwidth efficient at transmitting information to you. So please do excuse those if you've heard them before. If somebody hasn't heard them, I'll explain it to them. So, about 2 years ago, I got incredibly lucky. And I love this quote, because it has shown to me that the harder you work, the luckier you do get. Some crazy people said they were going to release a computer for $25, which at the time was a bit like saying, yeah, I'm going to solve cold fusion. Because boards at that time, even the kind of cheapest kind of computer development boards were $150 or more. They ran a logo competition and my entry got picked. And that's where everything kind of started changing really for me. It changed the industry as well. The Raspberry Pi, when it came out, made an entire industry kind of expand up here, and they made a lot of big companies kind of really have a little bit of a heart attack. You've got companies like Broadcom, Intel, Texas Instruments, who are worth just billions in market capitalization, changing their tune based on a small educational computer developed in the UK, which is a really brilliant thing. And although it was good to come see these big companies kind of struggling around chasing kind of this little project in Cambridge with no employees, the heart of it is education. So I'm going to zoom out for a second and say there's a pressing global need for education, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Humans are really good at breeding, really good at it. They're very bad at long-term planning. This means we've got massive overpopulation and dwindling resources, which is not good. So the solutions are pretty limited to that. You can reduce the birth rate. Again, that comes around to the long-term planning thing. We're really bad at it. Or you can increase the death rate. And people don't like the solutions to that very much, as they're generally war, famine, disease. Not very popular options, even though there's a lot of them at the moment around the world. So the other options are where kind of science generally comes in. Increase resources or find new ones. We're already working on increasing resources through science. India, for instance, generally only feeds itself because they use very high yield crops. Some of that is scientifically based, genetic engineering, but a lot of that is based on kind of agricultural hackers who've kind of found the way to get the best yields and therefore just adopted best practices, not involving genetically modified crops, not involving advanced fertilizers, just cultivating what they've got very cleverly to increase yields. The other thing is finding new resources outside of our planet. Stephen Hawking quote there, space, the final frontier. It's been 52 years since we first put man in orbit around the planet. And at the moment there are only 3 people in space. In 52 years it seems a bit low really. Check that site for a live update of how many people are in space at any one time.
Does it have an API?
Quite possibly. It's not too hard. Yeah, it's not too hard to scrape that one. It does vary, but yeah. If you get a problem with overflows on that number, then that'll be a great problem to have. Okay, this decade is a great decade for space travel. For the first time, no, sorry, for the 6th or 7th time, Voyager has left the solar system, which is a very interesting science reading as to when you say a thing's left the solar system. But yes, 52 years, and we've got the first thing out of the solar system. We've also had the first corporate project, which was a space taxi, which is good. It was a great achievement watching Falcon dock with the ISS, but still, in 52 years, that's dragging your heels a bit, I think. There are 3 people in space at the moment. In the same time, there seems to have been, if I believe the adverts I see on TV, at least 2,000 or 3,000 developments in deodorant technology. And this is part of the problem. We're quite selfish as a species. We have a lot of scientists who are taking up doing what I'd call fairly trivial seeming research, ones that don't get us off the planet, ones that don't feed the planet or get people out of poverty. This, I think, is a real problem, and education, I think, is where this problem comes in. Worldwide spending on cosmetics is over 3 times that on space travel worldwide. There's a nice little bar graph with no figures just to show you how big those bars are in difference. Seems a bit of a mismatch there. Again, I think it comes back to that long-term planning thing. In front of you have a problem, whereas space is very nebulous and hard to deal with. The education thing comes in because making knowledge a more commonplace thing, making people explore what's in front of them, look at what they've got in front of them, and be able to maintain and create extra things out of what's in front of them, computers, projectors, cameras, everything like that, means that scientists have to spend less time trying to create developments that help people do that make things easier. We raise the low water level, the base level, the water table of knowledge, such that scientists are then free to do other things. Is the rough theory. It's got a few kind of, odd points there. But anyway, that's the big picture stuff. Now, kind of back to the story bit. So, after the logo competition, which was almost 2 years ago now, as of October the 6th, I was kind of wedded to the Pi project. They had no employees, they relied on volunteers to get everything done. So I was helping them out with kind of doing branding stuff, doing web stuff, and doing design stuff such as diagrams to the board. I was also earning a living as a graphic designer and a web designer at the time, which was kind of incongruous given what I do now. Launch day came and it was immensely popular, and there were very few cases out there for the Raspberry Pi. And the ones I had there, I had both of the ones that were on the market at that time popular in my hands, and I was there going, yeah, it's good to have something, but they're not quite right. And I spent a few weeks going, yeah, it's not quite good enough, this. Somebody should really do something about this. And it took me weeks and weeks before I went, hang on, I should be doing something about this. And I think that's, again, something about humanity. We spend a lot of time going around, yeah, somebody should do something about that. Especially in the Western world in this day and age, we spend a lot of time saying, somebody should do something about that, without thinking maybe we should try. And that was kind of the click moment. After that, we get to our first open sourcey bit. I wanted to build a case, and I had been following Adafruit and SparkFun. I knew about open source, hardware and software, a little bit, but very shallow bit. So I knew that they use laser cutters to make these things, and I wanted to use laser cutters. But they're still, in this country, very hard to get your hands on and to get familiar with. It's better now than it was 5 years ago, but still very hard. Just at this time, my local hack space in Sheffield called Access Space, they got a laser cutter and they started doing Inkscape courses. Now, Inkscape is actually this really credible piece of software. It's somewhat akin to Adobe Illustrator, but with all the quirks that come with kind of open source desktop software, like OpenOffice. Yes, anyone who's used it, though they're not quite there, but Inkscape is a really creditable effort. And this was how I first learned to kind of get vectors through the software onto the laser cutter and make the first prototypes in this case. So even then, I was kind of starting to see the benefits of what's called that kind of open source diet. G, the guy who runs our PCB production now, is very keen on what's called the open source diet. As much end-to-end using open source in everything you do. Coming from a graphic design background, I've kind of been raised on Photoshop and Illustrator, and the way Adobe kind of lock you into the software there and how expensive it is and how hard to learn. The other thing was, one of the boxes I had was Adafruit's Pi box, which was a laser cut and also open source. They actually, just with the tributation, you could take that design and remix it, reuse it. So,
you haven't got anything on the wall?
Yep, that's all right. I'm just talking here. Stare into the space and see if that answers here. The slides will come back briefly. So, we at Pimroni got laser cutters in, and the software on them is terrible, but we're still using it now. And one of the things we want to look at in the future is getting something like a Mac 3 board or an open board in. But again, because we got popular very quickly, we have a time problem. And one of the things with a lot of open source hardware is it does require some time investment to make things, which is something we're looking forward to doing, but we're still on the back foot with that. But after seeing how Edinburgh have done with openness, we did decide we wanted to open source our case to some extent. Now it's really hard. We've now got 5 employees, and a lot of the revenue that pays their wages comes from selling primarily Pybo, although it's changing a bit now. It's very hard for us to say we're going to open source this completely, to let anyone make this case and sell it, because they will, and the thought of not being able to pay people because somebody else is selling a case that we made was scary. So we took the kind of, it's like chicken way out. Our rationale being that we like education, we like sharing knowledge, we want to raise that water table of knowledge. So we open sourced it under the Creative Commons non-commercial license, which is something I'm seeing cropping up in a few places now. Seems to be very popular, and it's kind of giving away the knowledge so people can learn and remix and do things around your thing without kind of giving away the farm so anyone can make the case, which sounds pretty good. In some ways I wish we'd been a bit braver, because what it turns out actually is if you have something that's popular enough, people will copy it, rip it off, clone it anyway. It's going to happen with anything popular enough, and whether you're open source or not, seems to be a little object after that. It just slows down the rate of change, the rate you get cloned at. Then we come on to the kind of sticky issue of intellectual property enforcement. Intellectual property was originally designed back, first copyright law was the Statute of Anne back in 1710 in the UK, the reign of Queen Anne. And what that did was, it was the first time that the right to reproduce something or control copying something went from publishers to the actual authors who'd made the work. And that was kind of the thing that came on today. And the Act, when it came in the statute, was very clear that this was to advance the learning and technological progress of humanity. That was very clear in the statute. It doesn't feel that way today. Copyright feels like it doesn't do that at all. It's there to ensure business, it's there to profit record companies, it seems like. And if you're the little guy, it's very hard to actually litigate and protect yourself. It costs a lot of money to go to court, and for a big company, they've got a lot of money to threaten people with litigation that will tie you up for ages. And litigating takes you away from what you like doing. We like making stuff, we like designing stuff, we like creating stuff around that. And any kind of litigation is just anathema to that, because it takes away time, it limits the way you do things, and just the act of litigation happening is very bad for business. Whether or not you lose or win, you've already lost the game by happening almost. In this way, the open source thing works because you can then create something, get it out there, make your money, and then move on. And I think that's good for human progress. And if you've open sourced it, then you've taken away the incentive for big companies to try and muscle in on it, really, because anyone could go and make it, anyone could retail it, earn a crust on it. So yeah, that's a little bit on litigation there and the whole intellectual property enforcement. We have actually started recently enforcing our rights as we see them a little bit on things like eBay and on Amazon, because we have in the UK also design right, which is a stronger right that you don't have in a lot of places in the world. In America it's very weak. So we can say this is the 3D object, essentially, things that look like this, we also get protection there. And in cases where we've seen people are just cloning, they're not giving anything back to the community, we have used essentially the mechanisms that eBay and Amazon put in place, akin to the DMCA, to have those taken down, which feels a little bit icky, I've got to admit. I love being able to have a copyright as a designer, I love being able to say this is mine and I can control it, but still, actually enforcing it feels like it's retarding the progress of humanity in a little way. But at the same time, I'm very much of the belief that we will do better with the money people pay for the cases than the cloners for a factory in China. So that's the way I kind of sold my soul by saying we are there to do something better, give more back. But then, how much better do we do? We've got people like Ben from Optics here.
Hey.
Yeah, Aaron from Lights here. And they are very much, they've been doing open source for years, open source hardware, and doing it properly. And it's good to see that when we did release that Creative Commons thing, Ben actually used the design to remix and make a plate so you can actually have a breadboard alongside the Pybo, as well as other cases, which was brilliant. That's the kind of thing we want to see. I don't think we'd ever see ourselves actually going up to Ben and saying, stop doing that, because that is exactly the benefit we want. But at the same time, we don't want to see people just churning out a case, trying to make a quick buck. That doesn't help us, doesn't help the community, helps them a bit, but I don't think that's why we're all here. So that's kind of our experience with open sourcing kind of our main product. When it comes to open source hardware, that's something that we haven't really done properly yet, but will be doing soon, because we now, thanks to the sales of Pybo, we have a pick and place machine, which is a great toy. And thanks to people like Sparkfun and Adafruit, there are a load of designs out there that means we can make kind of hobbyist boards fairly easily and legally, which, you know, is great getting them out there. Because these things are kind of at the core of making other people making their projects. They're very enabling things. So we love them to bits. And at the moment, we're just testing our feet with things like Pybo, which, I don't know, we're going to open source that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
I don't know why we haven't already, to be honest.
Right.
We'll get around.
Yeah, we're just getting open hardware apparently. For real. Cool. So yeah.
Do you want to take questions or first?
Wait for a bit, we're actually quite close to time, aren't we? So rushing ahead here. Here's a couple of the remixes. There's a belt that somebody at Adafruit made, Phil Howard. Paint My Dragon. He's the guy who contributes a lot of source to Adafruit's open libraries that go with their kit.
There's like the original
Phil Bennett.
pancakes as well.
Mm-hmm. And he remixed it, have belt flip on, which we love. And I don't know who made that.
No.
Yeah. Cool. So access space. Yeah. So here are 4 freedoms of free software. Sorry, not open source. Apparently there's some kind of distinction there. Does anybody know what those distinctions are?
Between free and open source.
Yeah.
Open source means you get the source, free software means you can actually do something with it.
That's it. That's about my knowledge as well, but apparently there are big arguments on the internet about this. But just to run back over them, freedom to run software. I think the equivalent of that in open hardware is the freedom to use the hardware for whatever purpose you like, really, rather than it being locked off or controlled by somebody else with DRM. Freedom to study and change, so this requires releasing designs. That's the bit we've actually got there so far with Pybo. Freedom to share, we get to do that as well. People can take down the CC design, use it, give it to somebody else as long as they say where it came from, as long as they don't sell it. Freedom to distribute modified copies, we fail on that. We don't allow people to sell completely, so we have restrictions there. So I'm just catching up with where I am in my notes here. I do apologise. No, actually, great. Yeah. So anyway, the best times in the company have been when we're free to do stuff, play with stuff, make stuff, and create really cool stuff. The worst times are when we've had to do things like the DMCA takedowns, when we've had to do things that aren't fun, when we've had to do things that feel a bit icky. So in that case, in that way, we feel that open sourcing is the way to go, even though we haven't yet fully made the transition to being a proper open source hardware company. For the speed we can move by looking at things and kind of tapping into what people like you want to do with stuff, we can keep ahead of stuff, we can keep doing cool stuff, and that will kind of keep us in a living. And we can keep sharing code, and we can keep doing things like the Python, where within a week of release, I think we had 5 people with quality libraries for it, which was just amazing to see, because we didn't want to do that work. And because we put it out there, told all about the hardware, and because at some point we'll be releasing the hardware files, people supported it, and that was one of the best things. If you are a company that goes out there and puts yourself out and says, we believe in this, we believe in education, we believe in cool stuff, and we don't just go and buy Aston Martins with stuff you buy from us, then you make a lot of really good friends. The people we meet around the Pi community, people like Simple Side, people like Jason Burb, I only do online handles, people like Ben, people like Aaron, who was pretty fundamental in getting us to understand lace cutters and getting them up to production speed, and was absolutely and completely generous with his time and his knowledge. They're the things that kept us going, kept us happy through this year of kind of making over 65,000 Pybos now, which is pretty much a one-note flute so far, but now we've moved on to other things like the Pi-Hub and the Pi-Clone, and yeah, we've got a long road ahead of us. Okay, that's my rambling just about over, so I think we've got some time for questions. Any burning questions?
When it came to doing the takedowns, did you approach the companies that were kind of doing the production? So were they in China then, these companies that were doing
No. One of them was in California, he was just a student.
Oh, right.
A lot of them, they did it kind of out of ignorance, but when the ones we did get in touch with, they responded reasonably well because we weren't cease and desist.
It depended how easy it was to get in touch with them, to be honest. How much the contact details were available.
A lot of the time, it's one of the few bits of DMCA I actually like. It's a very bad law, but the takedown system almost kind of works. You say, I believe this under pain of perjury, this infringes copyright. And the person can put it back up if they say, no, I believe you're wrong and I'm willing to stand up in court and say that. Most people, it did seem, but did get the feeling they were out just to make a quick buck.
Right.
So as soon as they got kind of any touches, they were going like, whoa.
So they weren't mass producers doing them in volume, they were tending to be a couple of hundred.
What's that, sorry?
They weren't mass producers doing tens of thousands or anything like that. Smaller production ones.
So far it's been hundreds we've seen. Yes?
Did anyone you approach you, for example, a student come back to you and say, can we make it under license?
Nobody's asked about license so far.
No.
No. But I think it's something we're open to a conversation about.
I'm just thinking, you know.
Students, I mean, when you say license to students,
Well, it's the student in the States saying, I'll give you, you have to ship it to the States, I can make it, can I give you a cut?
we did consider it. We like the quality, we like doing what we do. Yeah.
And to be fair, if they want to go and cut their own, they're welcome to with the open source design.
Yeah, students are. This was a guy who just come out of being a student, I think, or was on the way in his final year. He was now becoming an entrepreneur. He's actually gone on to make another case, which is kind of a living hinge, which I don't know if you've all seen it. On a lace cutter, you can cut perspex, you can cut wood in a very kind of filigree shape, which Gareth here knows a lot about. And it will actually, the material will bend based on the way you do the cuts. Have a look at the living hinge online, it's very interesting. But it's now gone on to produce an original work, which I think is doing okay, which is a positive outcome from what something that felt icky. Sorry.
Can you just say a little bit more about the access space stage, what you did there, how far that took you?
Access space, okay, full story. I went to Fab Lab in Manchester, walked in, and they gave me the tour around, and they said, okay, you can use stuff now. And I was actually a little bit scared about kind of trying to nudge people off the laser cutter or try and get access to it. It seemed like people were very worked out, and it was very fully manned without being kind of bookable. So I actually bounced off Fab Lab through kind of human frailty. Access space are a really inclusive space, and I didn't know a couple of people there, so I walked in and said, hey, I've got a great idea for Raspberry Pi, can I have some laser cut time please? And I kept doing that for a couple of weeks until I got in and actually got to do some physical laser cutting with a little bit of hand holding, but otherwise kind of, here it is, here's what you do, go for it. That was a process of then, I think I spent about 14 hours in front of the laser cutter over a couple of weeks. just iterating, and I think the whole thing cost about £50 in hard cash to get perspex mainly, and to give Access Space something for their time, because they are a charity. Does that cover the process?
Yeah, it does, and
Yeah.
Access Space are quite big on that welcoming kind of methodology and just that inclusive thing. So it's very interesting, the difference between that and Fab Lab in Manchester. I mean,
Fab Lab are commercial, but they do have their kind of non-commercial days that you must share, which again is kind of a nice thing. So no denigration to Fab Lab, they've got a good thing, people use it, and they give back to the community as long as the community gives to them as well, which is really nice. And they're kind of loose about it as well. Access Space is great, but I tend to find in the UK at least they are kind of filled with geeks, which I love because I love hanging out with geeks, but it is a certain kind of feeling. Access Space is really inclusive. They support people who are seeking asylum, people who are refugees, and they are truly inclusive as an open media lab stroke hack space.
Is anyone doing injection molded cases in China? Do you fear that?
We've avoided injection molding entirely. We don't fear that at all. Modern Wi-Fi were pretty much the first to market with an injection molded case. They've done very well for good reasons. Jacob's a really nice guy. No, we don't fear it because the market keeps changing, and whenever something changes, we can change with it. And I think that's about time. So, any more questions, catch me afterwards or catch me at some point during the day if you've got any burning questions on your mind. Otherwise, thank you for listening.